I didn't know that folding a simple cotton t-shirt could mark the end of a chapter I had spent my whole life surviving. It was a soft gray shirt, David's, my son's. I folded it neatly, as I had for years, without thinking. That's when I heard the shouting. "You ruined our lives, get out." Leah's voice was sharp, grating, like something tearing through fabric. It came from the kitchen and sliced through the stillness of the house, like a blade. At first, I thought maybe she was on the phone. That was how she often yelled into devices, into the air, into anything that couldn't yell back. But then I heard my name. "Miriam, you had to open your damn mouth." My stomach clenched, the shirt slipped from my hands, crumpling to the floor. I moved to the hallway, slowly, barefoot, cautious. The air felt thick, like something invisible was pressing down on the house. I clutched the doorframe. There they were, all of them, lined up like a scene from a bad play. Leah in her cream silk robe, standing tall and trembling, a stack of papers clenched in one manicured hand. Her sister Rachel was slouched on the couch, arms crossed and smirking like a bored teenager. Amber, their daughter, my granddaughter, stood stiff with her phone in hand, glaring. And behind them, like a shadow, stood David, my son, the only child I ever had, arms folded, mouth shut, eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite read. Shame, maybe, or just avoidance. No one moved. No one even blinked. Then Amber lifted her arm, and with a swift flick, a slipper soared across the hallway and smacked the wall a foot from my head. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You know exactly what you did." I stood frozen. My mind was already racing. Did I forget something important? Miss a bill? Drop a name I shouldn't have? I hadn't left the house in days. I didn't talk to anyone. "What did I do?" I asked. My voice didn't crack, but it was small, tired. Rachel laughed under her breath. "She wants a speech, like we owe her an explanation." Leah stepped forward and shoved the papers toward me. I couldn't even focus on the words. My eyes went to David. He didn't speak. He looked at the floor. Leah hissed. "You told the clinic about his work. That's what you did. You opened your mouth to the wrong person, and now we're under review." And just like that, I remembered. It had been a week ago. A casual follow-up call from the doctor's office. The woman on the phone asked routine questions. Address, insurance, household income. I hadn't lied. I hadn't even thought. Just told her David sometimes worked small side jobs to help cover things, even though he was on disability. It was casual talk, filler, like chatting about the weather. "I didn't mean anything by it," I said softly. "That's the problem," David muttered, eyes still low. "You never think." It was the first time he'd spoken. It felt like a slap. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Sorry won't undo the audit," Leah snapped. I took a slow step back. My fingers had gone cold. From the hallway shadows, I saw Noah, my grandson, 17, earbuds around his neck, eyes wide. He didn't speak. He didn't move. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted a verdict. "You can't stay here anymore," Leah declared. "You're a liability." Rachel nodded in lazy agreement. "Took you long enough." My breath caught. "You're kicking me out?" Leah folded her arms. "You can pack one bag. Don't drag it out." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked to the small room near the laundry machines they called the guest room. It had no windows. The only vent clicked all night like a metronome for insomnia. My things were packed into bins and crammed beside extra winter coats and Amber's shoes. I had one drawer in a dresser that leaned against the wall like it had given up. I opened it and found the folded gray shirt still in my hand. I placed it neatly on the bed and began to pack. I didn't have much. A coat, my purse, blood pressure pills, a photo album, the emergency money I kept in a sock. That was all. I could hear their voices from the other room, laughing, venting, celebrating, like they'd finally exhaled. When I zipped the bag, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something deeper, a knowing, a confirmation of something I'd suspected for years, but refused to believe. They didn't love me, they tolerated me. And even that was conditional. I walked down the hallway. Noah was still there, still watching. Our eyes met. He didn't say a word, just watched. I opened the front door. Cold air hit my face, and I inhaled like I hadn't taken a breath in years. No car, no plan, just one bag, and no place to go. I stepped out into the night. They didn't follow. And I didn't look back. The street was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're trespassing on the world just by breathing. I walked. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. The weight of the duffel bag on my shoulder started to dig in. My shoes were old and thin-soled, not meant for long walks or cold nights. But every step I took away from that house made my chest feel a little lighter. I must have walked for over an hour, aimless, just moving so I wouldn't collapse. I stopped twice to sit on bus stop benches, pretending to wait for something, but really just trying to make sense of everything. I replayed the words again: Leah's screaming, David's silence, Rachel's sarcasm, Amber's laughter. None of them had asked if I had somewhere to go, because they didn't care. Eventually, I ended up near the old shopping plaza on Ashburn Street. Most of it had been gutted years ago, but the nail salon was still open, its pink neon sign buzzing weakly in the window. Behind it was a narrow alley, and at the end of it I saw the sign, Room for Rent, Inquire at Salon. I hesitated. It looked run down. The alley smelled like old grease and cigarette smoke. But something about the chipped white door and the fact that it was hidden made me feel safe, or at least less visible. I stepped into the salon, clutching my coat tight. A middle-aged woman, with bright red glasses, looked up from behind the counter. "You hear about the room?" she asked, before I could speak. I nodded. "Is it still available?" She didn't smile, just tilted her head toward the back. "It's not much, but it's warm. You pay in cash?" "I can." She looked me up and down, probably wondering why someone like me, an old woman with clean shoes and tired eyes, was asking about a room behind a nail salon at 10 o'clock at night. But she didn't ask, just handed me a key and pointed. "Back door. Third door on the right." The room was small, just a metal frame bed with a sagging mattress, a nightstand with one drawer that stuck, and a dresser missing a handle. The walls were scuffed, and the only window looked out onto a rusted dumpster, but it was mine. More importantly, it was quiet. I paid the first month in cash. No lease, no name, no questions. She didn't care if I was running from something. She probably assumed I was. People didn't show up here by accident. That night, I sat on the bed, coat still on, staring at the cracked ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't think I could anymore. I just felt numb, hollowed out, like someone had scooped me out and left only the skin behind. But it was better than the house. At least no one laughed behind doors or whispered fake kindness in the kitchen. The next morning, I unpacked what little I had: a change of clothes, my pill bottles, the tattered photo album I'd kept since David was born. Inside it were pictures of him as a toddler, laughing with cake on his face, or curled up beside me on the couch with a picture book. That boy, the one with the gap-toothed grin and sticky hands, was gone, replaced by a man I barely recognized. I slid the album under the bed and taped a small sticky note above the sink. "Breathe. You're not there anymore." I started building a routine. Instant oatmeal for breakfast, tea in the afternoon, reruns of old game shows on mute. I went days without speaking to anyone except the red glasses woman at the salon when I handed her rent. No one else knew where I was. Not Leah, not Rachel, not even David. I figured they were relieved. At first, the silence felt like a gift. No doors slamming, no Trisha pacing, no Simone mocking, no Kayla snapping, just the quiet hum of a radiator and the distant buzz of salon dryers. But silence becomes sharp when it stays too long. By the end of the second week, I found myself staring at my phone more often than I wanted to. I hadn't turned it off, but I had the ringer silenced. No one had called. No one had texted. I kept scrolling past Noah's name in my contacts. I didn't press it. I didn't want to pull him into anything. He hadn't joined in their cruelty, but he hadn't stopped it either. Still, I missed his quiet presence more than I wanted to admit. One Sunday morning, I was pouring hot water over a tea bag when the phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go. A minute later, it buzzed again, then again. My screen lit up with missed calls. David, then Leah, then Amber. I stared at it like it was a rattlesnake. They weren't calling to say sorry. I knew that immediately. They'd made their choice. So what did they want now? I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down and pushed it under a towel on the counter. That night, I barely slept. Something in my bones told me this wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, my phone had 10 more missed calls, 3 voicemails, 2 texts, one from Dave. We need to talk. It's about Noah. The second. Please. That word hit me like a brick. I didn't answer, not yet. I needed to breathe, first, to brace myself for whatever was coming. Because I knew they weren't calling to apologize. They were calling because something was unraveling. And they needed me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed for what must have been an hour, staring at the tiny towel-covered bump where my phone sat underneath. It felt radioactive. Every buzz, every flicker of light from the screen made my chest tighten. After everything, what could they possibly want from me now? I finally picked it up and unlocked the screen. 15 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 1 from Amber, 1 from Leah, 1 from Kayla. But it was the 4th one, Noah's name flashing across the screen, that made my throat go dry. He had never called me directly. I hit play. It was Kayla's voice, but not the one I remembered, the smug, taunting, snide voice from across breakfast tables or upstairs hallways. This voice was smaller, breathless, cracked. Grandma, please. It's Noah. He's missing. We can't find him. He's just gone. Please call back if you hear anything. I felt every word hit my chest like gravel. Gone? Missing? Noah? I stood up too fast, the world tilting slightly. I held onto the wall to steady myself. My knees buckled, and I sat back down, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. Missing. The boy who had stood in the hallway and watched me walk out. The one who never joined their chorus. The only one who didn't throw stones. And now he was missing? They weren't calling because they regretted anything. They were calling because their house of cards had started to collapse, and they were hoping I'd come back and hold up the last piece. I replayed the voicemail 3 times. I couldn't stop. My thoughts raced. What if he ran away? What if he was out on the streets, alone, cold, scared? What if something worse had happened? And what if they were still lying? I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. I sat with the lights off, the photo album open on my lap, staring at the last photo I had of Noah. He must have been 10 in that picture, freckles across his nose, his smile crooked and unsure, like he hadn't decided whether he trusted the world yet. I remembered how he used to sit next to me quietly on the couch, flipping through books, eating the stale cookies I liked because no one else wanted them. He never said much, but he always looked. He always saw me. I picked up the phone in the morning and finally called his school. The secretary transferred me to the school counselor. A calm, warm voice came through the line. Miss Bennett, speaking. This is Miriam Lewis. I'm Noah's grandmother, I said. I'm calling because I heard he's missing. She was silent for a moment. Mrs. Lewis, yes. I remember you. From the parent night a few years ago. Do you know anything? I asked. She took a breath. He hasn't been officially declared missing. He hasn't been home, but he came to school early last week. He told me things at home had been difficult. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. He said he wished he could live with you. That things felt safer when you were around. He said there was a fight, he and his sister. She told him he was pathetic for defending you. The words punched through me like hail. He said she kicked him out of her room, that she told him to go live with his precious grandma if he loved her so much. I closed my eyes. I could see it. The venom in Amber's voice, Rachel's grin, David doing nothing. Did he leave school? I asked. No, he showed up the next day. But he was quieter, distant. I told him he could always come to me if something happened. That was the last conversation they had. I thanked her and hung up. I sat still, my fingers pressed into my knees. They lied. Of course they did. They made it sound like he'd disappeared, like he'd evaporated, like he ran off without warning. But they had shoved him emotionally, and maybe physically, out of their lives, just like they'd done to me. They hadn't lost Noah. They'd thrown him away. My phone rang again. Leah. I let it ring. Then Rachel. I declined. Then David. I paused and answered. Hello? There was silence. Then Mom. It was David, And for the first time in years, I heard the frightened boy he used to be. Not the hardened, passive man I'd walked out on. What happened? I asked, voice like ice. He's gone, David said. We've called everywhere, his friends, the school, even the shelters. And the police? They said they'd file a report if he doesn't come back tonight. I didn't say anything. He added, we thought maybe he came to you. Why would he do that? I asked. A pause. Because you're the only one he still talks about like he trusts. I felt the words settle in the air like snow, soft, heavy. I didn't respond to his guilt or pretend it was okay. I simply said, if I hear from him, I'll let you know. And I hung up. They were scared. Not because they lost him, but because they no longer controlled the story. I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to my chest, when it rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. Just one ring. I stared at the screen, then hit redial. Someone picked up. Hello? It was a young voice. Male, nervous. This is Miriam, I said. I'm trying to reach Noah. A pause. Then, yeah, hang on. A muffled shuffle. A door creaked. Then I heard it. Grandma? His voice was soft, fragile. Noah, I breathed. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm safe, he said. I'm with Malik. He let me crash at his place. I didn't know what else to do. Are you hurt? Do you need anything? No. He hesitated. Can I come to you? The question cracked something in me that I didn't even know was still intact. Yes, I said. Yes, anytime. Right now. As soon as we hung up, my hands were already moving. I didn't stop to think. I didn't need to. I grabbed my coat, the same one I'd packed the night they pushed me out. I stuffed my wallet into my purse, shoved the photo album back under the bed, and made sure my spare key was tucked safely into the inner pocket. He needed me. That was all I knew. He texted me the address 5 minutes later. A street I vaguely recognized on the other side of the neighborhood where I used to buy groceries before Leah insisted on doing it herself. I looked it up on the bus route, taped beside the light switch. 27 minutes, not counting the waiting. The trip felt endless. I sat stiff-backed the entire ride, clutching the strap of my bag, my foot tapping the floor non-stop, like my body couldn't contain the urgency. I didn't know Malik, just a name. Noah had mentioned once in passing when we were washing dishes together and Amber was yelling in the next room. He's cool, Noah had said quietly. Not fake like the others. When I finally reached the street, it was quieter than I expected. A cracked sidewalk, low brick houses, yards that hadn't seen a rake in months. The air had that wet, metallic scent it always carried before rain. And then, I saw him. Noah was sitting on the front steps of a worn duplex. Hoodie pulled up over his head, duffel bag at his feet. He looked so small. Not because he was physically tiny. He was 17, almost taller than me now. But because he was curled inward, like he'd folded himself up to take up less space. He saw me before I could call his name. He stood slowly, shoulders hunched, eyes red-rimmed. I wasn't sure if he would cry, or speak, or fall apart. But he didn't do any of those things. He walked to me and wrapped his arms around me so tight I thought I might break in half from the emotion of it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I held him just as tightly, pressing my cheek against the side of his hood, feeling the tremble in his back, the way he exhaled like he hadn't felt safe enough to breathe, until now. When we finally pulled apart, I looked at his face. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken. There was a split on his lower lip he hadn't bothered to cover up. But he wasn't broken. Not. You ready? I asked gently. He nodded. Yeah. He didn't look back at the house. He just picked up his bag and followed me. We didn't talk much on the bus ride back. He kept his hood up and stared out the window, earbuds in but no music playing. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, noting every twitch of his fingers, every subtle flinch when the bus lurched too suddenly. He'd been hurt more than he was letting on. When we reached my building, he hesitated before walking in. I unlocked the door and stepped aside. It's not much, I said, but it's ours. That made him pause, then nod, then step inside. He walked around the room slowly, eyes scanning the tiny kitchenette, the narrow bed, The shelf with my pill bottles, the dresser with one drawer that stuck. He set his bag on the floor and said, almost in a whisper, "This already feels better." I made him tea. Real tea, not the powdery instant stuff Amber used to drink. I gave him the nicer mug, the one I'd brought with me from the house even though it had a hairline crack near the handle. He took it with both hands and held it close like it was a source of heat, not just liquid. He didn't ask about the others. He didn't mention names. He just unpacked slowly, pulling out folded clothes, a sketchbook, a charger, and his toothbrush. He placed everything in tidy rows on the nightstand and the floor. When he lay down that night, I didn't ask questions. He faced the wall and curled up on top of the blanket, fully clothed, hoodie still on. I didn't press him to talk. I just watched over him like I had when he was little and had bad dreams. That night, for the first time since I'd walked out of Leah's house, I didn't feel alone. The knock came 2 days later. Sharp, fast, not casual. I knew it was them before I even looked through the peephole. Leah stood on the other side, wearing a beige trench coat like she was trying to cosplay responsibility. David was next to her, eyes on his shoes, his shoulders hunched like a kid about to be scolded. I didn't open the door immediately. I let them knock again. Then again. Finally, I cracked it open just wide enough for them to see my face. "We just want to talk," Leah said quickly, her voice coated in fake sugar. Her eyes flicked past me, scanning the space. "This isn't a fight," David added, still not making eye contact. I didn't respond. I stepped aside. They walked in like they owned the place, like they hadn't screamed me out of their lives weeks ago. Leah sat at the kitchen table. David stood beside her, hands in his pockets. They looked uncomfortable, but not remorseful. Not really. "We're here because we're concerned," Leah began, "about Noah, and about how this looks." I tilted my head. "Looks to who?" She blinked. "The school, the neighbors, CPS. You know how people talk?" "He's 17, I said calmly. "People don't need to talk. They can see." David finally looked up. "He called us abusive." "Was he lying?" I asked. Silence. Then Leah sat straighter. "We just want to know where he is, and if he's okay." "He's safe," I replied. "But no, he doesn't want to go back." Her mouth tightened. "He doesn't get to decide everything. He gets to decide who makes him feel like a person." Leah opened her mouth again, ready to unleash some rehearsed statement. But I cut her off with a look, a firm one, the kind I hadn't used since David was 10 and tried to sneak out of the house with a pocket full of stolen gum. "I'm going to ask you something," I said calmly, "and I want a real answer." Leah crossed her arms, clearly annoyed. "Whose idea was it to throw Noah's things into the hallway?" That knocked the smugness right off her face. David shifted from one foot to the other. "He was acting out," David muttered. "He said some things he shouldn't have." "He defended me," I corrected. "That's not acting out. That's courage. What did you expect him to do, sit there while you mocked me?" Leah straightened her back, her voice sharp now. "You don't know what it's like, Miriam. Raising 2 kids, managing bills, dealing with a sister who doesn't leave, and a mother-in-law who wouldn't go away no matter how many signs we gave her." I raised an eyebrow. "So this isn't about Noah's well-being, this is about damage control." She didn't deny it. That told me more than anything. David finally looked up, his face a mask of weariness. "Is he okay?" he asked. "He hasn't answered any of our messages." "He's safe," I said. "He's quiet. He sleeps better here than he ever did in that house." Leah scoffed. "He's a child. He doesn't know what he needs." "He's 17, I said. "He knows the difference between love and manipulation. That's more than I can say for you." Her eyes flared. "So what? You think you can just keep him here? In this shoebox?" I walked to the front door and opened it. The cold air slipped in, like a silent witness. "Better a shoebox full of peace than a house full of poison," I replied. They didn't move. Not right away. "What do you want?" David asked, finally. "You're going to keep him just like that?" "Yes," I said, "unless he tells me otherwise." Leah's voice rose slightly. "You don't have custody. You don't have rights. We were trying to be civil." I held the door wider. "If you were trying to be civil, you would have come before you started panicking. You would have asked how he was the night you threw his clothes out. You wouldn't have waited until your lie fell apart to show up. Neither of them spoke. If Noah wants to talk to you, I said, he'll reach out, but until then, don't come back. Leah's mouth opened like she had one last dagger to throw, but nothing came out. David nodded once, defeated. They left without another word. I locked the door and stood there, hand on the knob, pulse racing. It wasn't a victory. It was a boundary, and that mattered more. A few minutes later, Noah emerged from the bathroom. His hoodie was off for the first time, and I could see the tired eyes, the faint bruise near his temple that I hadn't dared ask about. Was that them? He asked. I nodded. I told them everything they needed to hear. He didn't press for details, just nodded once and went back to brushing his teeth, like it was a regular evening. That night, we made grilled cheese on my little hot plate and watched a muted comedy with captions. We didn't laugh much, but we shared the space, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke early and stood at the window, sipping my tea, watching the street below. I kept thinking about what Leah said. You don't have rights. She was right, in the legal sense. I wasn't his guardian. I wasn't listed on anything official, but what I did have was proof. Voicemails, texts, a counselor who'd seen the aftermath, and a boy who had chosen me when they made him feel disposable. I made an appointment that afternoon. The Family Legal Aid Center was a 15-minute walk from my apartment. I gathered every document I had, tucked it into a plastic grocery bag, and folded the edges to keep them dry in case it rained. The waiting room was small and warm, the walls lined with motivational posters and a rack of outdated magazines. I sat beside a window, fingers wrapped around the grocery bag in my lap. When they called my name, I stood up slowly and followed a woman with a kind but unreadable face into her office. She looked like someone who had seen too many battles and didn't flinch at the sight of new ones. Miss Lewis, she said, glancing at her clipboard. I'm Miss Harlow. What brings you in today? I took a breath, and then I told her everything. Not with drama, not with tears, just facts. How I was kicked out, how Noah was mocked for defending me, how they threw his belongings into the hallway, how I had the voicemails, the texts, the call logs, even screenshots of social media posts, including the one where Amber captioned a group selfie with "Finally push the parasite out." I showed her everything. She said nothing at first, just took notes quickly, flipping through each page I handed her. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the folder. You're not his legal guardian, she said plainly. I know, but based on what you've shown me, she continued, we can file for emergency temporary custody. It'll force a hearing. You'll need to testify. So will he. I swallowed. Will it work? She looked me in the eyes. Depends on the judge. But this, she tapped the evidence again, puts you on solid ground. I nodded, but I could feel the tremor in my chest. You're not doing this just for him, she added, more gently now. You're doing it for you too. She was right. For the first time in a long while, I was standing up not just to protect someone else, but to protect myself. I left the legal aid office, feeling like I was carrying more than just paperwork. It wasn't the weight of fear. It was something else, something unfamiliar, something that sat a little taller in my chest. Hope? The plastic grocery bag crinkled in my hand with every step. Inside it were copies of the temporary custody petition, my notes, and Miss Harlow's card with her name and a scribbled appointment time for next week. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't protection, but it was movement, and after standing still for so long, surviving, shrinking, waiting, it felt like power. When I got back to the apartment, Noah was still at the kitchen table, headphones on, eyes fixed on a worksheet. He looked up when I entered. Hey, I said, unzipping my coat. How was school? He shrugged. Did most of it online today. Teacher let me make up the quiz from Friday. Good, I said. I walked over and set the bag on the counter. I went to see someone. He blinked, pausing the music. What kind of someone? I sat down across from him and opened the folder. I didn't want to overwhelm him, but I wasn't going to keep secrets either. A legal aid counselor. Her name's Miss Harlow. I told her everything about what happened. About you. About them. He stared at me, lips parting like he wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. I didn't do it to stir trouble, I added. I did it to keep you safe. He nodded slowly. So what happens now? There'll be a hearing. Not right away. They'll notify them. Leah, David, maybe even Rachel, if she's listed anywhere. His jaw tightened at the mention of those names. But I continued. Until then, we're filing for temporary custody. Emergency guardianship. It means, if the judge agrees, you'll stay here. Officially, legally. He looked down at the worksheet in front of him. Then back up. I want that, he said. I want to stay here. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Then we'll fight for it. We spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet sync. I made soup. He helped slice bread. The apartment smelled like rosemary and garlic, two things that had never once scented the walls of Leah's perfect house. We didn't have much furniture, just two mismatched chairs, the bed and the rickety nightstand. But somehow it felt complete. That night, Noah handed me a folded piece of paper before bed. I had to draw something for class, he mumbled. It's not finished, but I wanted you to see. It was pencil on paper, rough and smudged, but clear. A small apartment, light streaming through a cracked window, two chairs at a table, one cup of tea, and a note above a sink that read, "Breathe." I didn't cry. But I did press the paper under my pillow before I slept. The next week moved slowly. Noah stayed on track with his schoolwork. I cleaned more than I needed to, wiped down already clean counters, rearranged drawers, folded dish towels so neatly it looked like a linen display. I baked muffins that turned out more like warm rocks, but Noah ate two of them anyway. He laughed more. He sat closer when we watched TV. He didn't flinch when the neighbor's dog barked or when someone slammed a door in the hallway. Something in him was starting to settle. He still didn't talk much about the house. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him murmuring in his sleep. I couldn't make out the words, but they were laced with fear. Sometimes, I'd sit up in bed and just listen, ready, if he called. He never did. But I stayed up anyway. One morning, as I poured cereal into mismatched bowls, Noah asked, "Do you think they'll try to stop it?" "The custody?" I asked. He nodded, spoon dangling between his fingers. I took a deep breath. They might, but it doesn't matter what they try. It matters what they can prove. And they can't prove love with silence and bruises. He didn't respond, but he finished his cereal. A week after the petition was filed, a thin envelope arrived at our mailbox, bearing the county seal. The court date was set. 2 weeks out. I read the paper 3 times before folding it gently and placing it under the candle on the kitchen counter. I didn't want to tell Noah yet. Not until I was ready with answers to questions I knew he'd ask. That evening, I sat at the table while he worked on a math worksheet and filled out a few more forms. Miss Harlow had asked me to bring back income affidavit, housing status, emergency contacts. There was a line that asked, "Reason for seeking guardianship." I stared at it longer than I meant to. And then I wrote, "Because the boy they discarded is the only one who still sees me, and I see him too. No child should have to beg to be believed." I stared at those words for a long time after I wrote them. That night, after Noah fell asleep, I sat near the window with a cup of tea. The water stain on the ceiling above my bed was starting to darken into the shape of a heart again, crooked, imperfect, but there. And I decided right then, even if I lost in court, I wouldn't send him back. I'd find a way, somewhere, somehow. Because love wasn't a right granted by biology. It was a choice. And I had already made mine. The days leading up to the hearing felt like they were stitched together by pins, sharp, nervous, fragile. I kept busy. That was how I coped. I ironed clothes I hadn't worn in years, rewrote my statement twice, then once more. I organized my papers into a neat folder with every text, voicemail transcript, photo and printed screenshot labeled with sticky notes like I was preparing for war. Because in some ways, I was. Noah noticed, of course. He didn't say anything directly, but he started staying closer, sitting at the kitchen table longer than necessary, offering to help with dinner, even though he hated chopping onions. One night, he just stood beside me while I washed dishes, silently drying each one and stacking them with methodical care. That's how it goes when you've both been burned. You hover close to the remaining warmth. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I lay awake, listening to the occasional drip of the faucet, the creak of pipes, the scratchy wind tapping against the small bathroom window. My hand rested on the folder beside my pillow, like a lifeline. What if the judge didn't see what we saw? What if all the truth in the world still wasn't enough? What if they sent him back? I turned toward the wall and stared at the water stain again. The crooked heart above the bed. That stain had become my prayer, my reminder, my symbol. Love wasn't clean, it didn't follow perfect lines. But it stayed, and I had stayed. At 6 in the morning, I rose and made tea. I stood in the mirror, a long time after dressing, smoothing my cardigan, adjusting my skirt, tucking in my blouse one more time. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but I didn't want to look tired either. Noah wore his best shirt. It was plain, navy, freshly ironed. He didn't say much as we got ready, but he gave me a small nod before we left. That nod said everything. The courthouse was gray and impersonal. Like most government buildings, too much linoleum, not enough warmth. We passed through security, checked in at the front desk, and were told to wait in room B. We sat in silence. Other families came and went, some tense, others bored, one crying. Noah sat beside me with his hands folded in his lap, his eyes flicking to the clock every few minutes. I reached over and touched his wrist. "We'll get through this." He gave a half smile. When they finally called our names, I stood first. He followed close behind. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Not the kind from TV, no gallery of people, just the judge, 2 attorneys, a clerk typing in bursts, and 3 chairs. Ms. Harlow met us at the door with a brief nod. "You okay?" she whispered to Noah. He nodded. We sat. Across the aisle, Leah entered in heels that clicked too confidently on the tile floor. Her lips were tight, her hair styled like she was going to a brunch instead of a custody hearing. David didn't come. Rachel didn't either. Just Leah. That was telling. She didn't look at me. Not once. The judge, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses and a face carved by years of difficult decisions, called the room to order. She read our names, flipped through the folder in front of her, and began the process. Miss Harlow spoke first. She outlined our case clearly, professionally. She didn't dramatize. She didn't exaggerate. She presented the texts, the social media posts, the voicemails. She referenced the school counselor's letter. She ended with one line that stayed with me. "This is not about removing a child from his parents. This is about honoring the choice of a young man who knows where he is safest." Leah's lawyer, a thin, impatient-looking man with slicked-back hair, rose and tried to redirect the narrative. He claimed Noah was confused, easily influenced, that I had manipulated the situation out of bitterness. But the judge didn't blink. She turned to Noah. "You're 17, she said. "Speak plainly. Why are you here today?" Noah looked at me, then at her. "Because when I was in that house, I didn't feel like a person," he said. His voice didn't waver. "No one listened to me. I wasn't allowed to feel anything. The only person who ever made me feel seen was my grandmother." The judge nodded. She didn't need more. She turned to Leah. "Do you have anything to say?" Leah stood up. Her mouth opened, but she paused, looked at me, and sat back down. That pause said it all. 5 minutes later, the judge signed the order. Temporary custody granted. I didn't cry, but I gripped Noah's hand so tightly he squeezed back. We left the courthouse without speaking. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. When we got home, Noah sat at the table and pulled out his history book, like it was just another Tuesday. I stood at the stove, boiling water for tea. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief. We weren't done yet, but we were no longer powerless. The days that followed the hearing felt different. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sudden changes in lighting or soundtrack moments, just stillness. A kind of peace that didn't have to announce itself. It just slipped in quietly, like warm sunlight through thin curtains. Noah didn't say much about the court, not even when the order came in the mail. He just nodded when I showed him the envelope and tapped the paper like it was a weather report, unshakable proof that he didn't have to leave again. I slid the document into the back of my photo album. Behind the last picture I had of him and David, Noah was maybe 9 in that photo, still with a soft baby face, while David's arm sat rigid across his shoulders like he wasn't sure how to show affection anymore. That was the last picture I kept of David. I didn't tear it up, but I didn't look at it again either. Now the album felt like a boundary line, the past behind it, the future in front of me. That weekend, Noah asked if we could go to the corner store and pick up some art supplies. He said it casually, like he was asking for milk or bread, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the way he looked to me for permission, not because I'd ever said no, but because for so long, they had. So we went. We walked down the sidewalk like normal people, just a boy and his grandmother. It was windy, but not too cold. He bought sketch paper, pencils, and a tiny eraser shaped like a bear. I bought a plastic container to keep the court documents safe. When we checked out, he paid with his own allowance. I didn't argue. Let him build. Let him own something. When we got home, he spread the paper across the kitchen table and got to work. I made tea, sat across from him, and quietly watched the pencil marks evolve into lines, then forms, then feeling. He didn't speak while he drew. His brows furrowed, mouth slightly open, hand moving fast and then slow, in rhythm, like music. It reminded me of the way he used to build towers out of cereal boxes and glue when he was 7, determined to make something beautiful out of scraps no one wanted. After an hour, he slid the page across the table. It was a drawing of our apartment, but not how it looked, how it felt. The room was cleaner in the picture, brighter. There were books on a shelf that didn't exist, and the crooked window wasn't cracked. But the 2 chairs at the table were right. 1 cup of tea, a blanket on the back of the chair I always sat in. And on the wall, over the sink, he had drawn the note I'd taped up that first night. Breathe. You're not there anymore. My chest tightened, but not with sadness, with awe. You're good, I said. He shrugged, but the blush crept into his ears. We taped it to the fridge. A few days later, I brought home a second chair from a thrift shop. It didn't match the first, but it was sturdy. I cleaned it twice and polished the legs until they shone. Now we really have a set, I told him. He smiled, like a real home. And it was. For the first time in years, I woke up not dreading the sound of voices through thin walls. I brewed coffee without tiptoeing. I opened windows without asking. I moved freely in a space that didn't punish me for existing. Noah started leaving his shoes by the door and his backpack on the chair. Little signs of permanence. Little signs of belonging. Sometimes, he cooked. He was terrible at it, but the effort mattered more than the taste. He scrambled eggs into something almost inedible, but I ate them with gratitude and told him the texture was inventive. He grinned and said I was lying. We laughed, really laughed. And we talked more. He told me about the day they kicked me out. How Rachel made jokes behind my back. How Amber mocked me in impressions she practiced in front of the mirror. How Leah said, "We're doing her a favor. She never had a real life here." And how David said nothing. I listened without interrupting, just nodded and let him unload piece by piece. He made me feel like I was broken for caring, he said one evening. Like I was weak, because I didn't laugh with them. You weren't weak, I said. You were just seeing clearly. That seemed to settle something in him. He no longer flinched when I hugged him goodnight. He no longer jumped at the sound of his name. He no longer waited for punishment that wasn't coming. One night, after dinner, I noticed him staring at the cracked window, the one that faced the alley. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. He shrugged, "Just wondering if they'll come back." I didn't pretend I didn't know who they were. "If they do," I said, "we don't have to answer the door." He nodded. Then he asked something I didn't expect. "Do you think you'll ever talk to Dad again?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know," I said. He stopped being someone I recognized a long time ago, but I'll always hope he finds the version of himself that used to call me Mom and actually mean it. Noah didn't reply, but he came over and rested his head on my shoulder for a moment. And that said more than words ever could. It's been just over a month since the hearing, and in that time, something surprising happened. Nothing. No calls, no knocks, no Leah, with her forced smiles. No David looking like he might say something, but never does. No Rachel stomping around like she owned the place. Not even Amber with her toxic giggles and perfect nails. At first, I thought the silence was a trick, a delay before some bigger storm. I imagined letters from lawyers, surprise visits, whispers in parking lots. I triple-checked the lock each night. I peeked out the window every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. I even started keeping my phone charged on the nightstand again. But nothing came. And eventually, I realized the truth. They didn't stop contacting us because they were scared of the law. They stopped because they were done with Noah the moment he stopped serving their image. He was no longer their golden boy. The smart one. The quiet one. The buffer they could use to prove to others that they were still a loving family. Once he saw them for who they were, and worse, once he left, they let go without a fight. Because that's how they were. That's how they'd always been. Once love required accountability, it stopped being convenient. One morning, I asked Noah, "Do you miss them?" He didn't answer right away. He was sitting on the couch, sketchbook in his lap, pencil tapping against his thumb. Finally, he said, "Sometimes. But only the version of them I thought they were." I nodded. "That's fair." He set the sketchbook down and looked at me. "I think I missed the idea more than the people." There it was again. That insight. That clarity. He had the heart of someone much older, not because he wanted to be, but because he had to be. That night, we cooked dinner together, mac and cheese with real butter, not powdered stuff from a box. We sat on the floor, plates in our laps, and watched a movie we'd already seen twice. It didn't matter. The warmth was in the routine. At one point, I looked over and saw Noah sketching between bites. I peeked at the page when he got up to grab water. It was a drawing of me. Not posed. Not styled. Just me sitting at the table, in my cardigan, tea mug in hand, a book open beside me, and a soft light from the window brushing the top of my head like a blessing. He'd drawn me as I was, not as anyone expected me to be. That meant everything. Later that week, I stopped by the community pantry down the block. We didn't need much, but I liked picking up fresh bread when they had it. The woman behind the table, Marta, had started greeting me by name. She was maybe in her 50s, with a braid down her back and kind eyes that scanned people without judging them. "Looks like you're doing better," she said softly, as she handed me a bag of carrots. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You used to walk in here like you were apologizing for breathing," she said. "Now you look like you're standing in your own skin again." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled. As I walked home, the paper bag warm against my side, I realized she was right. I hadn't noticed the shift because I was living inside it. But it was there. I no longer flinched when people looked too long. I no longer checked every corner twice. I no longer expected punishment after peace. Back in the apartment, I opened the windows wide and let the breeze sweep in. It carried the scent of someone grilling meat 3 floors down, mixed with spring air and the faintest trace of lavender from the detergent I now used without asking permission. Noah came home from school that afternoon and found me humming while folding laundry. "You okay?" he asked. I chuckled. "Better than okay. I think I'm finally feeling real again." He nodded like he understood. That weekend, we made a grocery list together. Not just food, but things to make the apartment feel more like a home. Dish towels that matched, a clock for the wall, a cheap but sturdy bookshelf. We took the bus to the thrift store and spent almost 2 hours combing through the aisles. Noah picked out a navy blue mug that said "You got this" in faded block letters. I found a chipped ceramic pitcher with sunflowers on it. We didn't need either. We bought them both. When we got home, Noah unpacked everything while I made tea. Then, without being asked, he taped another one of his drawings to the wall beside the fridge. It was us. Not smiling, not posing, just existing. In the same room. At peace. 2 people who'd been told they didn't matter, choosing to matter to each other. That night, as we ate toast at the table with mismatched plates and a cracked candle flickering between us, Noah asked, "Do you think this will last?" I didn't lie. "I don't know what forever looks like," I said. "But I know what this feels like, and that's enough for now." He nodded and passed me the last piece of toast. By the time April settled in, our lives had taken on a rhythm. The kind of rhythm that hums, not shouts. Noah went to school, each morning, with earbuds around his neck and his sketchbook tucked in his backpack. I packed his lunch, not because he needed me to, but because it made me feel useful in a way that wasn't demanded or expected. When he came home, he'd dump his shoes by the door and immediately flop onto the couch, groaning dramatically about math or someone chewing gum too loudly during a quiz. Normal things. I loved the normal things. Sometimes, I forgot just how far we'd come. Until reminders showed up. It happened on a Thursday. Cloudy, damp. The kind of day that presses against your windows like it's trying to get in. There was a knock at the door. Not loud, not frantic, just intentional. I froze. My hands were wrist-deep in soapy dishwater, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then another knock. 2, spaced apart. Familiar. I dried my hands on a dish towel slowly, heart thudding in my chest. Noah was at school. I was alone. I walked quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. Leah, wearing the same beige trench coat she'd worn at the custody hearing. Beside her stood Amber, arms folded, face painted with makeup that couldn't cover the scowl underneath. I didn't open the door. They knocked again. Then Leah's voice, muffled but clear. Miriam, we just want to talk. Please. I stood still. I counted to 10. Then 20. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I waited. Amber stepped closer. We know he's here. Her voice wasn't pleading, it was accusing. Still, I didn't move. Eventually, the footsteps faded. I peeked again. They were walking down the hall. Amber already tapping at her phone. I didn't exhale until I heard the stairwell door slam shut. After they left, I checked the lock 3 times. I turned the deadbolt so hard it clicked louder than usual. Then I leaned against the wall and let my body shake. Not from fear, from anger. The gall, the nerve, to show up now, not when he was hurt, not when he was scared, not when he cried in his sleep. Now, when they were probably scared someone might ask where their child was. When it was about appearance, not accountability. I sat down at the kitchen table, pressed my palm to the surface until it stopped shaking. The court order was still tucked safely into the plastic folder above the fridge. I pulled it down, ran my fingers over the seal. Legal custody. Temporary, yes, but real. They had no right to take him. No right to be here. When Noah came home later that afternoon, he immediately sensed something was off. You okay? He asked, dropping his bag. They came, I said. Leah and Amber. He went still. What did they want? They didn't say much, just knocked. I didn't answer. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, chewing the inside of his cheek. Were they mad? Amber looked like she'd bitten into vinegar. Leah looked tired. He nodded. They'll spin it. Make it sound like we're the ones keeping secrets. Let them, I said. Truth stands, even when people try to dress it up. Noah pulled out his sketchbook and sat at the table, quieter than usual. A few minutes passed before he said, I don't think they miss me. I think they miss the idea of me. I looked at him, heart aching. I think you're right, I said. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in bed staring at the stain on the ceiling, now slightly faded into something that looked more like a bird than a heart. Funny how things change with time. Around midnight, I got up, wrapped myself in my cardigan, and padded to the kitchen. I made tea in the dark, letting the kettle whistle softly before pulling it off the stove. I sat at the table and opened the plastic folder again, not because I doubted, but because I needed reassurance in ink. As I turned the pages, I found the note Noah had slipped into the back weeks ago. A drawing. It was of the door, our front door. But in the drawing, it had vines growing around it, creeping up the frame like protection. On the doormat, he'd written one word, safe. I pressed the paper to my chest. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were rooted. The next morning, I took a trip to the hardware store. I bought a second lock, a chain, a new peephole lens. Not out of paranoia, but because this space had become sacred. It wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was earned. I installed everything myself, carefully, precisely. Noah watched from the kitchen, a small grin on his face. Didn't know you were that handy. I was a mother before I was your grandmother, I said. I've done more than hang pictures, believe me. Later that day, I taped a fresh note beside the door, right under the original. It read, Only love enters here. By May, the air had started to warm. Not just outside, but inside, too. It drifted through the apartment like something newly earned, slipping between curtains, carrying the scent of morning toast and second chances. I'd never thought a place this small could hold so much healing. But every creak in the floor, every flicker of the stove burner, every corner Noah carved into his own, it all whispered, "You're here, you're safe." Still, quiet doesn't mean silent. The knock from Leah and Amber lingered in the back of my mind, like a bruise. Not painful enough to change my rhythm, but too fresh to forget. I hadn't told anyone, not Miss Harlow, not Marta at the pantry, not even the neighbor down the hall who always smiled too brightly. It wasn't fear that kept me quiet. It was clarity. I knew what it was now. Performance. They wanted to show the world they'd tried, that they weren't the villains, that they were still concerned. But real concern shows up when someone's crying in a locked room. Not months later, in lipstick and fake apologies. Noah never brought it up again. But he started locking the door when I wasn't home. That was enough. On a Wednesday afternoon, Noah got home early. A half day at school, he said. Some teacher in service or exam prep. He tossed his backpack onto the couch and kicked off his shoes with a grunt. I was sitting at the small table, mending a frayed sleeve on one of his sweatshirts. He'd torn it helping an elderly man carry groceries down the stairs a few days ago. He'd pretended it was nothing, but I saw the way the man had patted his shoulder with gratitude. Noah shrugged it off. Then, but his eyes had softened. That boy had always had a kind heart, even when the world tried to turn it against him. He poured himself some juice, sat across from me, and said, "I want to tell you something, but I don't know how." I set the needle down gently. "Take your time." He glanced out the window. The trees were budding, little green fingers poking through branches like hope. "Back when they kicked you out," he said, "I didn't say anything. I wanted to. I almost did. But I was scared." My chest ached. "You were a child in a house full of power games. Of course you were scared." He nodded, swallowing. But I hated myself for not stopping it. I kept thinking, if I had spoken up sooner, maybe you wouldn't have had to leave. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Noah, I left because it was time, and I stayed gone because I knew deep down you'd find your way to the truth." His hand tightened around mine. "They made me feel like loving you was a betrayal." I didn't have to answer. He already knew what I would have said. That night, we cooked dinner together, chili with too much cumin and cornbread that fell apart when we cut it. We laughed until we cried, trying to get it out of the pan. It tasted like glue, but we finished every bite. Later, I found a small envelope on my pillow. Inside was a folded note, written in his quick, messy scrawl. "Thank you for making a home out of something broken. You didn't just save me, Grandma. You reminded me that being kind isn't a weakness." I pressed the note to my chest and stood there for a long time, blinking back tears I didn't let fall. Not yet. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. A formal one, from the court. The hearing to review the temporary custody was set for late June. A chance for them to contest. A chance for me to prove this wasn't just a phase. I showed Noah the letter that evening. He didn't look nervous, just resolute. "They won't win," he said. "I know," I said, "but they'll try." "I'll testify again," he offered. "You shouldn't have to." He shook his head. "Maybe. But I want to." I sat down and smoothed the crease in the letter. "They'll say you're confused, that I turned you against them." "I'm not confused," he said. "I'm clear." And he was. I could see it in the way he stood, now, no longer with his shoulders curled inward, no longer bracing for rejection. He stood like someone who had survived the fire and now carried its warmth. That weekend, I started going through an old box of papers I hadn't touched since I moved in. Bills, receipts, clippings. I found a photo of David when he was around Noah's age. Lean, bright-eyed, holding up a science fair trophy with a crooked grin. I stared at that photo for a long time. It didn't make me cry, but it made me wonder. What happens to that brightness? When does the slow erosion begin? Who teaches a person that silence is safer than love? I tucked the photo back into the envelope and slid it under my bed. Some memories weren't meant to be destroyed, but they didn't need to be framed either. One evening, just before bed, Noah asked, "If I get older and I start to forget, can you remind me?" "Forget what?" I asked. "That I'm not what they made me out to be." I touched his cheek gently. "I'll remind you every day, if you need me to." And I meant it. Not with speeches. Not with lessons. but with the kind of love that shows up in the smallest ways, the kind that waits at the door, that folds the same hoodie for the 100th time, that remembers how someone takes their tea. The morning of the second hearing arrived quietly. No dramatic thunder, no heavy clouds, just a warm breeze and sunlight painting lines across the cracked floor tiles of our small kitchen. I woke early and brewed tea like I always did, the routine grounding me as much as the steam in my hands. I could hear Noah moving in the other room, the sound of drawers opening, the thud of a shoe dropped too hard. He was nervous, I could feel it in the walls, but he didn't say it. He didn't have to. We dressed, without speaking. He wore the same navy shirt he wore last time, his collar ironed neatly. I chose my green cardigan this time instead of the gray one, soft and heavy, like armor woven from memory. When we arrived at the courthouse, everything looked the same. Same gray walls, same scratchy chairs, same stale air, but we were different. We walked in, side by side this time, not as two people hiding, but as a unit. Miss Harlow met us in the hallway, flipping through her papers briskly. They're contesting, as expected. Leah submitted a statement. Rachel too. No surprise there. They're going to claim you're isolating him, she added. I didn't flinch. They don't know what isolation feels like, I replied. Inside the courtroom, Leah sat at the far end of the table, her trench coat replaced by a pale blue blouse. Her expression was carefully blank. Rachel sat behind her, legs crossed, mouth twitching every few seconds like she was holding in a performance. David wasn't there. Again, I didn't know if that made it better or worse. The judge entered. Same woman, same calm face. But her eyes carried the memory of our last encounter. She glanced at the papers, then at Noah. You're still under temporary guardianship, she began. Today we're here to determine whether that continues or ends. Leah's attorney stood. He talked for nearly 15 minutes. Words like manipulation, estrangement, misunderstanding. He called Noah a troubled teen with misguided loyalty. Noah sat still, eyes locked on the table. Then it was our turn. Miss Harlow didn't waste time. She presented the updated transcripts, new messages from Amber that had surfaced, cruel ones, mocking ones, screenshots of a group chat where Noah's name was a punchline, a photo of a poster from school, defaced with a slur. I hadn't seen that one before. Noah shifted slightly, but his face didn't change. Then the judge asked him to speak. He stood slowly. I'm not here because I hate my family, he said. I'm here because they didn't protect me. Leah flinched. They told me I was weak for caring. They laughed when I cried. They kicked out the only person who ever made me feel safe. They didn't just break my trust, they buried it. The room went still. The judge nodded and turned to me. Do you have anything you wish to add? I stood, my palms warm with quiet fire. I didn't ask to raise another child, I said. But when someone knocks on your door with shaking hands and nowhere else to go, you don't wait for permission, you let them in. And then you fight like hell to keep them safe. The judge looked at us both. I've heard enough, she said. 10 minutes later, the gavel fell. Permanent guardianship granted. The breath I didn't realize I'd been holding escaped my chest all at once. We left the courthouse in silence. Outside, Noah exhaled and said, It's done. No, I said softly. It's just beginning. That night, I baked a cake from scratch for the first time in years. It wasn't pretty. It leaned to the left and cracked down the middle. But the frosting was sweet, and the air smelled like vanilla and redemption. We lit a single candle, not for celebration, but for acknowledgement. One small flame, for one enormous shift. Noah cut the first slice. We ate it on the couch, plates balanced on our knees, the flicker of a movie neither of us was really watching dancing on the screen. Afterward, we rearranged the apartment. Just a little. Moved the table under the window, hung Noah's drawings higher, added a new towel hook. By the door. Each change a small declaration, we are here to stay. That weekend, we bought a plant. A real one this time. Not plastic. A pothos, with long green tendrils that curled like curiosity. We placed it on the sill, where it could chase the light. Sometimes, I still think about the day I left. About the door that didn't close behind me. The hallway light that flickered. The sound of Kayla laughing through her phone. The way David never turned from the television. I used to think that moment broke me. Now I know, It made space for something else. For me, for Noah, for this. Last night, Noah fell asleep on the couch with a book in his lap. The TV buzzed softly in the background, but he didn't stir. I pulled the blanket up to his chin and turned off the light. Before I went to bed, I looked at the kitchen one more time. At the 2 chairs, at the note above the sink, at the drawing, still pinned to the fridge. And I whispered to no one, in particular, "You didn't ruin my life, you just gave me a reason to reclaim it." Then I walked to my room, closed the door gently, and let myself sleep, fully, freely, finally.